getting that grazing group set up earlier, from 2 weeks of age onward really helps us get through fields quicker, but also means we're resting more fields. I think particularly a year where it's challenging, both in terms of lower growth and maybe suitable grazing areas, is probably a better consideration to actually get in and get out of those fields without mucking them up quick. So establishing that grazing rotation early, particularly for those early marsh lamb and flocks, is important. Hello, I'm Ciaran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now, lambing's in full swing on many farms across the country, and in this episode of OviCast, my colleague Damian Costello steps in the host as I'm the guest as we continue the series on monthly management notes. In this episode we cover the challenging grazing conditions this spring. We discuss the targets, fertiliser planning, as well as how we can go about improving lamb survival through better colostrum management and how we could treat hypothermic lambs. We also discuss the importance of flock biosecurity, culling problem ewes and identifying replacement ewe lambs. We finish up discussing managing risk of grass tetany in early lactation.
So, Ciaran, it's been a challenging year, I suppose, to say the least, weather-wise. In terms of grassland heading into the start of March, what are the key targets that sheep farmers should be looking at for the month of March?
Yeah, you're right, Damien. Look, it's certainly a tricky start of March. And look, I suppose a lot will depend on the weather improving as the month progresses. Look, the reality is, I suppose, we have to work with the conditions that are there, adapt our management, the suit, and that's going to be very farm specific. But it is important we try and stick to some of the kind of key performance targets of March, because I suppose we're trying to do two things, Damien. We're trying to maintain performance and we're also trying to set up our grazing year. Really what we do over the next couple of weeks does set up a lot of that. So I suppose the basic targets we're looking for are pre-grazing covers, something in the order of 1,000 to 1,200 kilos of dry matter per hectare, or 7 to 8 centimetres of grass, taking that down, grazing out to a residual of somewhere between 3.5 and 4 during that first rotation. Probably the other key target to bear in mind is how much of the farm we get through. So we say for an early March lambing system, we're trying to get through about 60% of that ground by early April, and the first rotation complete by mid-April. And that's where conditions allow for early March lamb and flocks. Them latter two, Damien, are going to be a little bit trickier this year, especially getting our residuals cleaned out to 3.5, 4. And for some farms, getting through the 6%, and other farms could be slightly ahead of that target. So that is going to be a little bit trickier. What we really want to try and avoid, Damien, at this stage is grazing low covers for extended periods. And I think this is going to be applicable to some of those flocks that maybe land mid-February onwards, maybe going out to lower cover. Certainly we know not much fertiliser is going out. So when that sward height drops below 4 centimetres, ewes aren't going to meet their daily requirement from grass alone. Now, the implication that is, if they're not going to meet the requirement, they're going to burn off reserves, and also, more importantly, the milk yield is going to drop. So we're going to need to put in some supplement there to maintain performance. May also be necessary too to actually slow up that rotation, because if we farms there that are getting ahead of their target of 60% by the end of April, and that's not hard and fast, but it's a good rule of thumb to have there. If they're starting to get ahead of that already, well, then we do need to slow up the rotation now, because that's going to severely impinge on the second rotation and kind of a key period where ewes are hitting peak milk yield. So if you're finding yourself getting into them two situations, you need to put feed in. Putting in the form of concentrate is the easiest way to provide it. Again, we touched on some of this last week. Up to half a kilo in a single feed. If you need to go more than that, really, it should be twice a day feeding. And
I suppose acting in time is kind of the critical thing, as you say, before you run out of grass.
Essential, Damien, because look at the old line of it takes grass to grow grass. You don't want to find yourself in that situation of where you're just run out completely and feeding large numbers. Look, for a lot of flocks, it might be the whole way through lambing yet, so it is smaller numbers. Now, not easy feeding outdoors. There's no simple way around it, but yeah, you're better off going early and maintain that bit of performance.
The other effect, I suppose, of the weather, Ciaran, is it has delayed the first round of fertiliser application on most farms, and again, I suppose fingers crossed, as you say, for an improvement in the weather at this stage. But assuming people have fertiliser on hand and in the yard, what are the couple of things, the couple of key things you're looking for before you get out with some fertiliser?
Yeah, look, it's no hard to mention. And again, look, you touched on the first one there, Damien, having the fertiliser push, just having it ready to go. Again, look, when you're busy in the middle of lambing, you don't want to have to start going looking for it. I suppose we can start looking at the rate, depending on the stock rate in the farm, somewhere between 15 and 25 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Protected urea would be our preference at this stage here. So we're talking about between a third and a half a bag per acre in loan money, again, depending on demand. I suppose our key considerations, look, Firstly, soil temperature should be above 6 degrees, ensuring rising response. That means grass is actively grown, and I think by and large across the country that is the case. The bigger challenge would be to avoid spreading on wet or waterlogged soils. That's going to risk nitrogen loss and we're also going to damage the soil. And we know that there are certain fields you just couldn't travel on at the moment. So we need to be able to get in on the fields. And again, ensuring that there's no real heavy rain or that coming for 48 hours after put on application. We don't want to lose it from an economic point of view, and we also have to consider an environmental risk of doing so. Just practically speaking, I think we need to consider is to prioritise the driest fields first. Don't be waiting to spread the whole farm. Generally, on most farms, there are certain areas we can get out on and travel on. Prioritise those fields first, at least have some going out and it working with all the above restrictions considered. Our fields with the most perennial ryegrass content are going to give us the best response. And again, look at ideally coverage of over 500 kilos or 5 centimetres. If it's barer fields, we tend to get less of a response, more of a risk loss. They're probably the ones more suitable to either slurry or farm or manure applications, where we're able to recycle those nutrients and get that early season growth without compromising risking nitrogen loss.
So the lower covers, ideally slurry or farm manure if you have it available. And again, I suppose lots of farms have been caught by the weather with that situation as well. And I suppose then in terms of getting your groups set up for the coming grazing season, Ciaran, when you've lambs 2 or 3 weeks old, I suppose the importance of grouping them up and getting them into their grazing rotation as early as possible, I suppose, is important.
Yeah, look, it is. And I suppose this is the other tricky one, Damian, especially if you're in a situation where supplements going in smaller numbers are easier to manage. But the challenge here is they will take up more grazing area. So all fields have been depleted at one time. And we aren't really getting through ground as quick. So getting that grazing group set up earlier, from 2 weeks of age onward really helps us get through fields quicker, but also means we're resting more fields. I think particularly a year where it's challenging, both in terms of lower growth and maybe suitable grazing areas, it's probably a better consideration to actually get in and get out of those fields without mucking them up quick. So establishing that grazing rotation early, particularly for those early March lamb and flocks, is important.
I think that's an important point because sometimes the temptation in difficult conditions can be to put smaller numbers in every field and then you're going to run into bother later on.
Yeah, look, I suppose in the first week, Damian, or so, that's grand, but as them lambs start to get older, we need to start kind of moving them on a wee bit.
Getting them into their groups. I suppose, Ciaran, the lambing is kicked off on lots of March lambing flocks and it certainly will in the next week or two. In terms of health issues in the run-up to lambing, we often find we have issues. Maybe would you outline the importance of, I suppose, maybe getting to the bottom of this? For example, if you have a couple of ewes aborting or something like that, what are the steps in terms of identifying the issue you have?
Unfortunately, Damien, it's probably the one thing that leads a lot of flocks into lambing. We do see a little bit of losses in that kind of final week to 10 days as we run up to it. Small bits of abortion that occur. I suppose very important maybe to keep in mind, knowing our records for start with what level is. So you can have some abortions due to physical injuries or otherwise, but when that crosses 2%, we have an issue on the farm. We can also see lambs maybe suddenly dying, ewes dying for no apparent reason. I suppose the first thing we need to do here is to contact our vet, prompting about the issue, get their expertise on it, get their set of eyes on it. And in the case of an abortion, really what we need to do is submit samples to our local regional veterinary laboratory to identify the cause, because it takes the guesswork out of it. Now, some of them issues, Damien, it may be too late to address them in the current lambing season. For some of them, there can be a little bit of prophylactic treatment used that can stem the issue. But what we're looking at here is the long-term impact it can have on the flock. So if we get a correct diagnosis, we can put control measures in place in the farm, vaccination programs in place in the farm to reduce that for the following year. Sometimes it may be no obvious cause, it could be just one of them things, but that's also a good thing because it can allay some of the fears around it. So prompt action, Damien, there is contacting your vet firstly and then doing follow-up samples where needed.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very useful information, as you say, for planning for seasons ahead. That you can eliminate or or you can isolate, I suppose, what the cause has been, or if possible, and you can plan for avoidance in the future. I suppose on the health side of things in the run up to lambing, I suppose. In terms of biosecurity, you live in some bigger flocks. I suppose people may have help coming in for the lambing time. Often one that springs to mind, I suppose, is people that buy in a foster ewe or buy in a pet lamb as necessary. Maybe outline some of the, I suppose, potential sort of risks, I suppose, from a biosecurity point of view that you're encountering in that situation.
Yeah, no, it's no harm to consider, Damien. And look, it's a very high risk period on the farm because you have a lot of animals in a confined area. Their immune systems tend to be a little bit more compromised around lambing time, so it is a key period. We always have to consider every animal or person coming into a flock does pose a potential risk, particularly during that lambing period when infectious agents are more easily spread. So I suppose a couple of key things will always come to mind, and we've discussed these previously. Like one would be avoiding any unnecessary purchase. So but the idea of buying pet lambs to put on ewes or foster ewes to rear lambs is a quick solution. It does introduce a very significant health risk. You have to always bear in mind, Damien, that the healthier flock is only as good as the worst flock you bring any stock in from. So I suppose the question will always come is, well, why is it a pet lamb? Why is that ewe a foster ewe? What happened to our own lambs? If you really have high value on your flock health, I think it's maybe something to be avoided, but you have to assess that risk when they're coming in. They could potentially be bringing something with them. In terms of the helpers, look, there's probably two aspects to this. Firstly, is to protect the individuals themselves. So whether it be students or family members helping out in the farm, should always use protective equipment. So be it gloves, proper work gear on it to safeguard their own health. Probably something else to consider though is if your students that are coming in at your farm, that maybe their work gear stays on the farm with them, or certainly it's clean work gear to your farm. You don't want them bringing in infections with them, which can come in work gear, and you don't want them bringing home infections with them either. So just, maybe providing them a couple of basic things for those that are helping you out on the farm at that key period. And maybe lastly, look at, again, we talk about hygiene a lot, and we've discussed the importance of hygiene in pens. We also maybe need to consider maybe setting up disinfection pints, just simple even foot baths are not going in and out. If you have a couple of different sheds, ensuring helpers are not coming in on the farm, use them. Again, that waterproofs are kept clean, your pull-ups are kept clean, and your work gear is kept clean during that lambing period. It all just potentially reduces the risk of spreading infection from lamb to lamb or sheep to sheep.
Yeah, absolutely. And, very, very practical sort of tips there. I think even, leaving their waterproofs or their willies on farm is a really useful one. And as you say, it's attention to detail in term when we talk about hygiene in terms of reducing the risk. And again, I suppose we often talk at this time of the year about the importance of colostrum and getting your newborn lambs after the best possible start. And I know we've mentioned this before, but maybe just recap, I suppose, Ciaran, on the importance of colostrum to the newborn lamb in terms of survival and also their subsequent performance.
Probably a good reason, David, we mention it on a regular basis because, look, it really is getting them off to the best possible start if you get enough colostrum in them, both from a point of view of developing their own immunity and their subsequent performance. Improving survival, a lot of it is down to getting adequate colostrum in early enough. I suppose, just briefly, it's doing three key things. It's providing a dense energy source of nutrients that's essential to that newborn lamb. It's a source of maternally derived antibodies that gives that lamb immunity through passive immunity because they are born naive, so it's giving them the ability to fight off infection. And lastly, it acts as a laxative to clean out that digestive tract, which is also important. In most cases, Damien, that lamb should be vigorous enough to get up and suck himself without any intervention, but it's important when we do need to intervene that A, we give them enough colostrum, and B, we give them the right type of colostrum. So I suppose our targets is to get 50 mils per kilo into our lamb in the first 6 hours of life and 200 mils per kilo in the first 24 hours of life. So I suppose practically what does that look like? Look, for most decent sized twin lambs, we're talking something in the region of 250 mils in that first feed, which roughly equates to 4 of our standard kind of 60 mil syringes. Again, look at triplets, 200 mils, singles at 300 mils in that first feed. That is really the best possible start we can give them lambs. I suppose the challenge in some farms, Damien, is particularly for maybe those lambs that need that intervention, mammy mightn't just have enough milk either. So we do need to look at an alternative source of colostrum, and there probably are a couple out there. I suppose maybe a simple way of looking at them, Damien, and rank them in terms of their antibody transferability will be from another freshly lambed ewe, so one that has lambed within that 24-hour period. You can certainly consider cow colostrum. Ideally, this should be pulled from two or more cows and fed at a 20% higher feed rate. And we have the colostrum alternatives out there as well. Generic ones are on the market, which all have a use. Maybe if I to try do one thing a little bit different, Damien, is probably one fallacy we can kind of lack into there is if, for instance, we have twin lambs, we need to get 500 mils. The ewe only has 200 mils. We tend to feed the first lamb the full 200 and maybe look at one of the alternatives for the rest. What I suggest maybe do instead of that is to pool the sample. So put the 200 mils into a jug, look at one of the alternatives, whether it be from another freshly lambed ewe, cow colostrum, or one of the proprietary brands, and top that colostrum up. What we're doing in that case is, if we pool it, we're ensuring that each of those two lambs will get some of its mother's own colostrum and therefore some passive immunity from the dam. I think that's important. So we're giving both lambs a chance at acquiring some level of immunity from the mother. Particularly important when we consider things like our Clostridium vaccines and that, we're depending on them lambs getting colostrum into them. So very important we just maybe change practices a little bit around how we handle colostrum and stomach tube lambs. So A, the amount, and B, that they ensure they get some new colostrum into them.
I think that's a really important point, that you have a system in place that you're making sure that every lamb gets at least some of the mum's colostrum. The other area maybe just to talk about is if we find a hypothermic lamb, we've spoken again before about giving a glucose injection in order to replenish their energy reserves. Maybe in the first case, maybe talk us through what situation that you would consider giving a glucose injection to a lamb. What are the couple of things that you're looking for?
Yeah, look, I touched on this briefly last week with Michael, but no harm recapping it. Our hypothermic lamb is a lamb when its body temperature drops below 37 degrees. And what's happening in that lamb, Damien, is its energy reserves have been quickly depleted. It's burning up any reserves it has, its blood glucose level drops, and that lamb ceases producing heat. Essentially, it's going to go into a coma. So it enters that recumbent state, and that is nearly all cases without intervention is followed by death. I suppose the caveat around this one, Damien, is in very young lambs, they will have their organs are encased in a brown fat, a very dense energy source. They're slightly different. In some reserves there, we can deal with them slightly differently. But for lambs over 5 hours, it's vital that we actually intervene and raise those glucose levels rapidly before we consider things like going into a warming box or feeding them colostrum. If we skip the step in raising that blood glucose, Damien, what often happens is they will take fatal seizures in the lambing box or after being fed. They don't have enough energy there to either warm themselves up again or actually deal with the milk we're after feeding them. So it speeds the process up essentially, and it nearly always ends up in that lamb dying.
Okay, so if they're over 5 hours of age, this is where we're intervening, and I suppose it's like a lot of things around the lambing time. Maybe in terms of preparing a glucose solution, or what are the couple of bits of equipment and that you need in order to have these to hand to do this when you need it.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And look, some of this stuff will be in the lambing shed anyway, Damien. The extra supplies we need are readily available. They're cheap and cheery. What we're looking at here is we need obviously a way of heating the water. So you'll find a kettle in most sheds. That's a way of providing sterile water. We need a tub of glucose or dextrose powder. They're fairly readily available in most agri stores, veterinary stores, your chemists or your health food shops. You'll be able to get a tub of each. And look, again, €8, €10 will buy you a couple of kilos of a tub. Will do you certainly at least one lamb. And anyway, we also need a sterile 60 ml needle with a hypodermic syringe head on. So that's one we can attach a needle to. That's your standard large syringe we have. And we need a sterile 18 to 20 gauge needle, 1 inch long is what we'd recommend. We also need a clean container to mix the solution in. So a clean jug or two. Again, the kind of equipment we're talking about here, Damien, is fairly readily available, cheap and cheery, but you need to have it on hand. There's no point looking for it at 6 o'clock in the morning and waiting for 9 o'clock for a store to open to get this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So you've boiled your water and you allow it to cool. I suppose sometimes you could be in a little bit of a panic. Maybe just talk us through the preparation briefly of the solution.
Yeah. So look, you touched on it there, sterile water. So the boil kettle will provide that. What we want to try to do here is make up a 20% solution. So about 100 mils will cover us for a lamb and leave a bit over. I suppose if you're more than that, we'll have to make it up more, but it's easy to adjust. Essentially, to make up that 20 ml solution, Damien, we need to mix 80 mils of boiled water, which, look, at you have a 60 ml syringe there. It's going to be fairly easy to make up the 80 mils. And we're going to add 20 grams of glucose. Now, look, if you weighing it good and well, but practically speaking, that's about 4 teaspoons of the glucose powder. It would dissolve very rapidly. So as soon as you put them into it, it's practically dissolved. You did touch on there, look, waiting for it to cool down. What I would do at first, we tend to meet most of these lambs, Damien, out in the field on that sleety morning. Can happen in the shed as well. When older lambs, maybe we assumed they were sucking and they didn't. So don't assume that it's just outdoor lambs this happens to. I would just get the kettle boiled, having the water cool first, and make it up. If you do need to cool it in a hurry, Damien, storing that solution or tossing it between two beakers, or even sitting your jug into a bigger jug with cola water, a bucket or something with cola water, obviously not contaminating it, will cool it quite rapidly.
And again, I suppose maybe just you've prepared your solution. You've deduced that this lamb requires the glucose injection. Maybe just in terms of the administration of it, maybe talk us through that procedure.
Yeah, and look, it's a fairly straightforward procedure. It's one we can be a little bit squeamish about, but I think it's a technique we really do need to learn on farm. So what we're trying to do, Damon, here is we're going to hold the lamb by its front legs, so it's basically upright with its belly facing outward. If you have a person there to hold it for you, good and well, it leaves it a little bit easier. If you don't, you can do this yourself by just holding one hand. What we're going to try and do is to give that lamb 10 mils per kilo body weight. So look, in practical terms, Damien, for your standard twin lamb, as we mentioned earlier, 50 mils, I think will cover a lot of the lambs we're going to need to do with this. So we're going to give them a 50 mil solution. Our injection site is 1 inch below the navel, 1 inch to the sides, go across an inch, go down an inch. We want to sterilize that injection site, so just spray it with, or dip it with iodine or a similar antiseptic will do. We're just trying to clean that site. We're going to inject that animal or that lamb at a 45-degree angle. So we're essentially aiming towards the base of the tail head. So angling that syringe at 45 degrees. Press it in fully to 1 inch. Draw back on the syringe slowly. If you find blood or urine present, in a very rare case, discard that solution and reposition for the next time. Inject slowly once it's correctly placed. So now we've got the solution into them. What that's going to do is that's going to be rapidly absorbed in that lamb and rapidly raise his blood glucose levels. Now we need to warm up that lamb immediately. So we need to have something like a warm box, an area set up with a red bulb, some place that we can rapidly warm that lamb up. Give it about 20 minutes to half an hour or so, Damien. That lamb should start to move around and get up and start standing. So once it's standing, we can either feed it with colostrum or milk, depending on what age it is, and look at its aftercare at that stage. And again, I suppose an important consideration there is to maybe look at what was the cause. Was it just a particularly bad night in an exposed field? Have we a bit of smothering going on? Maybe it's a hog at yoke going out with twin lambs that she's not fit for. So look at the underlying causes. Some of them lambs will be suitable to go back with the dam. Some of them mightn't be. You just need to look at what the causes are afterwards. I suppose the key thing to this, Damien, is in 90+% of those cases, unless we follow this procedure, we have no hope of saving that lamb. So it is one of those things that can seriously reduce the level of mortality we get in those really difficult years and in those problem cases where we need to intervene.
I think it's fair to say, for listeners that wouldn't have tried this before, it's a bit of a shot to nothing in that. If you do anything else, there's not going to be a positive outcome, I suppose.
There's not, and look,
it's worth the try.
It certainly is, Damien, that lamb. Look, if you try it once, you learn the technique once, you'll have no issue doing it again. It's just the first time we were a little bit squeamish about getting over it. Very useful technique, but as you touched on there, you have to have the supplies in place first.
Absolutely, and it's the same as anything we say in terms of preparation for lemon. It's a couple of not expensive at all items that you need to add to your pre-lemon shopping list. Again, I suppose in terms of the management of the flock around the lemon, and you mentioned it there. Maybe this lamb arose because the mother had a lack of milk or whatever. But I suppose in terms of identifying problem ewes in the flock during the lambing time, probably no better time to make a decision on problem cases. Have you any advice or tips on how best to deal with those type of cases?
I'm a big fan of cull tags, Damien. It's probably the one time a year we can cut down on some of the problems because them problematic ewes tend to be repeat problematic ewes. Look, we often say we spend 90% of our time with 10% of flock. This is maybe the chance to cut down on some of those issues at a really busy stage of the season. So Yeah, culling problematic ewes, putting a permanent mark in place. Some are fond of notching. I think the cull tag probably be a bit easier to see, but whichever works here. And look, what I'm talking about here is, ewes are prolapsed. Ones that are continually rejecting their lambs, maybe ewes with bottle teeth or pendulous, others. They're the kind of things that's going to need more intervention during the lamb period and even after when we go to the field. And look, there could be some of the cause of those hypothermic lambs we mentioned a minute ago. Um, I think really good time of the year, cull those ewes out. Mightn't be easy to
Mm.
see some of these issues later on. We can often wonder why maybe ewe in good condition there's a cull tag in it. Well, maybe that's the ewe that rejected the lambs or lost the lambs outdoors afterwards. So long term, I think it's one of them small investments that can really help work towards a more productive flock.
And definitely improve in flock performance, and also from a labour point of view, I suppose, Kieran, it's a kind of if you're not taking those out of the system, it's a cumulative thing. There will be new problem yours, if you like to say, the following year, and if you're adding them to existing ones, it's going to get worse and worse, I suppose.
Definitely will.
I suppose the other thing in terms of management around the lambing, it's probably a good time for people that breed their own replacements and have a closed flock. Is it a good time to maybe have some system for identifying potential replacements at lambing time?
Yeah, look, converse to the one we just mentioned, it's ideal chance to really identify those replacements. Look, some of that will have began back the previous year of ram selection from either purchasing rams or maybe splitting those, your flock up into the different breeding groups. But look, I suppose the couple of key things to consider, what do we really want here? Well, we want to choose lambs from litters that are easily born out of problem-free dams with good maternal traits. So what that essentially means is shows that lamb themselves get on with life, look after those lambs. That's the kind of desirable traits we want to bring into a flock. So I'd certainly be avoiding the ewes that we mentioned previously, Damien, but I would be looking at trying to identify them from those. And some of those ewes we mate at certain rams, they might have been ideal last October, but if they start showing up with problems in March, well, that's not really traits you want to bring into a flock. Practically speaking, I suppose, look at marking those selected lambs. Temporary management tags are a good way to do it. Even permanent tags some will use with this and that. Them. Put a permanent mark in place at an early stage. Identify those replacements. Probably my key advice, Damon, here is start early, select plenty, because you can always cut them down as the season progresses. And look, some of those will not meet your criteria as the year goes on. So pick enough of them day one. That temporary tags, Damien, it's not a big investment money-wise, but it's an easy management tool to implement on farms.
And as you said at the start there, it goes back to the planning, having a breeding policy and breeding enough of yours to the maternal rams in the first place. But as you say, it's good to have a good selection of potential ones, and you can see how they go from there and select again at weaning time, I suppose.
Yep, look, for a closed flock, it's absolutely essential.
I suppose the other, in terms of getting back to flock health, I suppose, a concern lots of farmers will have, maybe particularly in poor weather conditions, is grass tetany in ewes. Maybe explain a little bit as to what causes the condition, or what you can do to prevent it, I suppose.
Yeah, look, at something again we touched on last week, but look, given the time of year at, maybe no harm just to recap somewhat. Look, at grass tetany, it occurs as a result of low blood magnesium levels. You always need a daily intake. It can become challenging in the spring, whether it be from the weather or various other conditions that can affect uptake of either grass or their ewes' ability to absorb those nutrients from the grass. So under normal circumstances, ewes require something in the region of 1 to 2 grams of magnesium a day. In more challenging conditions, in that more extreme cold, wet weather, that can rise to 3 to 5 grams a day because of their ability to absorb it. So probably practically speaking, Damien, the two key things we need to consider is prevention. Firstly, is better than cure. So CalMag or magnesium buckets, in most cases, will be our most common prevention method. And I suppose for those, we need to consider that there's enough of them in place in the paddock. So just putting one inside the gate really isn't sufficient. You need to consider moving a couple of them around the field so they have free access to them. So a couple of buckets there, and ensuring that those are clean. Sheep do love to use them to clean their feet and that often, so they will get soiled with either soil or fecal matter. Keep them clean. If you do get a dry spell, which I think we'll all welcome, it can also limit intake of them. So just if it is a real dry spell, making sure they're moist to encourage intake. In the more extreme weather, Damien, maybe like what we had over the last couple of weeks, it may be necessary to go in and feed and look at certain farms, as we've touched on before, are more prone to this, have a higher risk on it. So feeding a bit of concentrate, maybe a half kilo concentrate that contains CalMag at a rate of 10 kilos per tonne, is an effective way at reducing the risk of grass tetany.
So keeping an eye on the weather, I suppose, Ciaran, that you can preempt and get in maybe a day before the poor weather is expected, if possible.
Exactly, Damien. Look, if you do need to treat, you need to treat promptly, but prevention is the key here. So if you're relying on the mag buckets, have enough of them out in each of the fields the sheep are in, and again, make sure that they are suitable for sheep, because not all magnesium buckets are.
Ciaran, I think we'll leave it at that. We've covered you've covered a lot of stuff there, and a lot of important practical tips for the month of March.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Damien again for stepping in the host. I have included a link in the show notes to an e-version of our Teagasc Sheep newsletter, where you can access on the Teagasc Daily. That's it for me. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.